And now we are getting ready for the first panel. The panel is called Current Status of the EU Green Deal, Challenges and Possibilities. And Mistra has funded several research programs and projects related to decarbonization, geopolitics, green policies and such. So there are a lot of relevant knowledge concerning this topic, but I will invite to the stage first Dr. Allan Mikaelsson to give a short introduction to the Mistra-funded Green Policy Tracker before we continue to the actual panel discussion. So, Mikael, Allan, please come to the stage and you can tell us a little bit what this project is all about.
Thank you. Thank you. First, extend our gratitude to Mistra, Anna, and the Swedish representation to the EU, Karen, for having us here for this incredibly important and timely discussion. And also would like to express our gratitude to Mistra for funding the work of this Green Policy Tracker, which I will give you a quick introduction of. So the EU Green Policy Tracker, it monitors the status of policy implementation of climate and environmental policies at member state levels. So these are the EU policies. And what we mean by policy implementation, we're not talking about the effectiveness of the policies to deliver on the targets, but rather the process of aligning those EU green policies to national legislative frameworks around aligning and assigning responsibilities and roles to relevant authorities. Is about building administrative capacities in governance structures and also securing the resources. And this is an area which has largely been a bit of a black box when it comes to around the overview of policy implementation, and the role of this tracker is to provide a little bit of transparency in this area. So today we are here with the Mistra Foundation launching the prototype of this EU Green Deal Tracker, which is currently examining the implementation of 4 EU Green Deal policies across Sweden and Estonia. Those 4 policies are the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the revised Land Use and Land Use Change Framework, the Just Transition Fund, and the revised Energy Efficiency Directive. With the long view that we're aiming to build a comprehensive tool for implementation transparency across all the different climate and environmental policies of the EU, with all EU member state countries in the long haul. So just to give a bit of an insight of what kind of information it provides, so we anticipate that this will have valuable insights for different stakeholders, certainly policy members in Europe across both the EU level and the national level as well. We expect this providing insights for policy analysts and civil society. The tracker gives a country-level snapshot of policy implementation status across different EU environmental policies. It provides also a deep dive into specific policies in country contexts. It allows us to provide comparative analysis of implementation patterns, so we can see what policy challenges are being shared by different countries and perhaps across different policies, and which are maybe potentially country-specific or policy-specific in nature. And then finally, it also enables us to get an insight in what are some of the drivers that are either enabling or hindering implementation of policies. So we have a small kind of a video here that provides you with a bit of an overview of how this tracker works in practice, and perhaps you could go ahead and
The EU has adopted numerous green policy initiatives to guide its transition to a climate-neutral economy by 2050. The success of these policies relies on their effective implementation at the national level. Our tracker can help EU and member state officials, as well as policy researchers, gain a comprehensive insight into green policy progress across Europe. While the full version will monitor the implementation status of all green policies across the 27 EU member states, this prototype tracks 4 policies of the EU Green Deal in 2 countries. The policies were selected based on national relevance and to cover a variety of sectors. Estonia and Sweden were chosen due to their long-standing involvement and leadership in sustainability policy within the EU. Select a country to explore its progress on each policy's implementation identify strengths and challenges, and delve deeper into the national context based on up-to-date information from leading officials in government departments and national authorities. Or you can focus on any single policy in each country for a more detailed overview on progress to date. Our tracker allows you to compare policy progress across countries to identify synergies, shared challenges where higher level support may be needed, or opportunities for knowledge sharing between member states. Learn more about each of the policies or read an in-depth comparison of their implementation progress between the selected countries. We hope our tracker provides valuable insights as we continue to expand its scope to support effective policy implementation for a climate-neutral future.
So, this is the tracker. You can access it here through the QR code, but also wanted to mention that we have, alongside the tracker itself as the web-based tool, we've also published a policy brief that synthesizes and summarizes some of the key findings from the tracker, and also highlights some of the cross-cutting issues that we're seeing across these different policy areas for the two countries. So, with that, thank you very much.
You don't leave. You can go, So, we're getting ready for bringing our panelists to the stage. The panelists, apart from Mikael, Allan, is Lars Zetterberg, the senior specialist at Mistra Carbon Exit at the Swedish Environmental Research Institute. Andersdotter, head of the EU office for Swedish Enterprise. Irina, head of the energy program at Center for European Policy Studies. So please welcome to the stage. So, yes, trying to stand where the microphones are so that they can hear you when you speak. The EU Green Deal has faced both strong momentum and significant pushback lately. In a time of geopolitical instability and economic uncertainty, the Green Deal might seem to be at a little bit of a crossroads. So I would like to ask every one of you to give a relatively short answer to the question, where are we right now? Would you say the Green Deal is facing like a temporary political setback, or are we entering like a longer phase of reorientation? Lars, do you want to start?
Certainly, thank you, Maria, and hello everyone. It's an honor to be here at Swedish representation and in Brussels. Thank you very much, Mistra, for organizing this. Yes, I think it's a very relevant question when we look, first in the US with the new government and see what's going on there with these crazy tariffs that are being implemented as we speak here, but also the threat to leave NATO. Of course, this has brought both trade and security issues up on top. But before that, we also had the Draghi report, which has been very influential for European policy. And one of the main conclusions there is that EU industrial development is lagging. We need to step up when it comes to industrial development. So with all this happening at the same time, it's easy to think that, okay, environmental issues will need to stand back. But actually it's quite the opposite, because the Green Deal is not a cost, but an opportunity. By phasing out fossil fuels and increasing the share of renewables, we will actually become less dependent on imports of fossil fuels, which we import a lot today, and also that will reduce the revenues to Russia and funding the war against Ukraine. But also the Green Deal means the development of green technologies, and the EU is in a very good position to do this. We heard about bioeconomy, but also to develop green steel and green cement and green vehicles and electrify industry. And this, of course, provides business opportunities. So I wouldn't say, and also this is highlighted in the Draghi report, so it's not only about lagging behind, but it's also showing on these opportunities that we have. And the decarbonization is definitely one of those opportunities. So I wouldn't say that the EU policy is being reoriented, but I would rather say that there's more emphasis on independence And I think that's something we will be looking at for the next 5 years with the new Commission.
So it's more that we are moving in the same direction as before, but we use other arguments for wider.
Yes, I think so. But I mean, those arguments are not new. They were here for three years ago when Russia did the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Even then, the EU was very fast responding and working a lot on becoming less dependent on imports.
EU, for example.
That's right.
Yes.
There is one new issue though, and that's defense, but that requires a lot of explanation, so maybe we can return to that later.
Maybe I will. Irina, what would you say? Where are we right now?
Well, yeah, I will talk about a bit more from an energy perspective. So I would agree with Lars that, well, the trajectory is there, the energy transition, the fourth energy revolution, or like whatever you call it. And of course, it's not like an overnight click. So it's a journey, it's a long journey, and the trend is there. And the big question is like how we arrive there. The core underlying assumption is like we need a strong economy. So without a strong economy, without strong internal market, it's very difficult to project externally anything that you would call like normative power Europe, regulatory power Europe, or whatever. So it's very difficult to project any soft power or hard power, market power, if there is no strong economy. And of course, the Clean Industrial Deal is all about, well, clean tech. We saw it, it's very clear. But also in energy, well, there are not so many choices. Yes, Europe is import dependent now on fossil fuels. Also, well, in the green transition, there are dependencies on critical raw materials. So there is a lot of work needs to be done how to actually probably reduce these dependencies within the Clean Industrial Deal. And actually answering your question, that's a question we try to answer in our report. We published it last June. So it's green and enviable. So we try to, we think that Europe, the European Union can have enviable economy. And there we try also to answer a bit more in details this question. So in a nutshell, yes, it's on track, but there can be different trajectories.
Yes, thank you a lot, Irina. And Charlotte, I apologize for getting your name wrong on our PowerPoint. Charlotte is your name, right? Yeah. Please, what's your view on this?
Well, I do agree also on that we are on track. If we look at, we have mentioned all the different things happening around, but if you just look at the Green Deal, it was a political priority for the last commission. And as the commissioner said, we're moving into the implementation through the Clean Industrial Deal. So if that is, the reorientation is more not in a political policy or priority, although there are other challenges that we have seen from when the Green Deal came out in 2019, of course, but the track is still there. It has just been reoriented a bit more towards, or quite a bit more towards the implementation, which is something that we appreciate, of course.
Yes, thank you very much. And Mikael, how would you phrase it? Where are we right now?
Yeah, I would agree with my colleagues here in the sense that this is a temporary political setback. I don't think this will have a lasting implication, and the reason why is mainly that the structural integrity of the West Antarctic ice sheet doesn't care about the political headwinds on either side of the Atlantic. Only a few days ago, you had Gunther Oettinger, a senior board member of one of the world's leading insurance companies, Allianz, warning that without far greater ambitious climate policies and actions, we would probably see the end of capitalism in the coming decades. And this is simply because of the fact that we're now increasingly seeing the erosion of the financial institution's ability to absorb, transfer, and adapt to climate risks. At the same time, you'll have, there was a recent report a few weeks ago coming from the Institute of Actuaries. So these are the mathematicians and statisticians that are working in financial institutions with risk analysis. And in that report that they published, they actually stated that the Paris Agreement goals were not informed by realistic risk assessment and are implicitly accepting high risks of tipping points. And so what that tells me, these things, is that we're actually now starting to see the financial institutions and financial sectors taking a far more starker tone in their warnings and being more vocal on the actions. So while much of the kind of our actions on climate policy has been very much driven by industrial strategy for good reasons, it has been incredibly important to unlock kind of and co-op with the business sector to help unlock the green growth and the green job opportunities around it. And certainly that will continue into the future. But I think we are still at a conjunction point where we need to go into looking beyond climate policies as an industrial strategy. This is a civil protection, this is a national security issue. And I think that will help us unlock solutions and issues that we've perhaps been kind of refraining from tackling on to date.
Thank you. Please don't hesitate to raise your hands if you have comments when up to the other speakers' comments, so to say. I think this is a really interesting topic that you mentioned, because even if we can see that the costs of climate change are becoming more evident and the risks become more obvious, there is still a tendency in the political discussions to become a little bit more short-term. And the competitiveness agenda and security policy agenda seems in many policymakers' minds be like in opposition to this green transition. I would like to hear, Charlotte, what's your view on that? You say that it could go hand in hand, but the short term versus the long term, what would you say about that?
Well, at least from our company's perspective, the green transition and competitiveness have always gone hand in hand. They are very intertwined with each other. From our perspective, we don't see that. You have to keep two thoughts in the head at the same time. I know that there are some voices saying that, yeah, we have to think about the competitiveness and maybe the green transition can come later when we have less of all these different kind of crises that we always have. But we will always have crises. And at least for the majority of our companies, for them, the green transition is a business model. That is the future. If we don't do that, we will be out of business. And yes, I do agree to a certain extent with you that there are other parts that will also influence this for the future. But it's clear for our companies, the way forward, whether politicians want it or not, it's to try to, with green solutions. And I would really hope that politicians, scientists, and etc., we work together with the companies because we can provide the solutions. We are the ones that can take fantastic science that we do within our universities and research institutions and actually bring them to new solutions that could give support to all these crises that we have, whether it is a crisis in the environment purely or if they are used in warfare, because that's also something that you can use the energy or water supply or whatever, but we can be there and support. But we need the conditions, the framework conditions, and to be able to do that. And this is at least what we hope that this, well, let's call it reorientation. It's not a reorientation away from the green transition, but towards implementation that will bring to really make us, because we still believe that Europe is very strong in this area, and we can do that also at the global level, still remaining optimistic that this is possible.
Thank you. Lars, you have worked extensively on EU climate policy. What risks do you see in this current push to deregulate and delay parts of the Green Deal? And how could Sweden and other member states take action to get the sort of influence the EU approach here?
Yes. Well, there has been examples of certain groups trying to delay the implementation of the Green Deal. For instance, the the big parliament group, the EPP, proposed to delay the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, by 2 years or more. But this was not supported by the EU Commission, and even more importantly, the Swedish Confederation of Industries. When that came out, they urged to the Swedish politicians not to delay climate policy. And the answer, and why they do this, you explained that you see business opportunities in developing the green technologies. So it's really good to see that the industry is the ones that are more or less driving climate action today. And we see examples of actually industry asking politicians to make the policy more stringent, so it supports the pathway that the industry already has decided to take. So that's of course very positive. And this is not unique for Europe. We see the same thing in the United States, in spite of Trump, and China, of course, where they are developing these new green technologies very, very fast. So I don't think that it's a question of slowing down this transformation in Europe, but rather speeding it up so we can be up there and participate in this green tech race, as you call it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of business invested a lot of money, of course, in this green transition. Irina, you're heading the energy program at CEPS, and energy infrastructure, of course, is crucial for everything, industry, geopolitics, everything. I know that you have tried to find out like what would be the most crucial investments that are necessary to the energy system to create affordability, competitiveness, climate transition, and all that. I think that it would be interesting to hear your viewpoint, because it's so much easier to talk about, the vague targets and that everything, this is important and everything, but to actually go from there to actually get it done. I think that's where you come in here.
Well, yes, thanks for the question. So, of course, the Green Industrial Deal will focus a lot on affordable, cheap energy, and the Affordable Energy Plan has been published together with the Green Industrial Deal. And if you have a look at this plan, of course, you can see like cheap energy prices, cheap electricity prices, cheap electricity. All this is like being repeated almost on every page. So we want it to be cheap energy, we want energy cheap and affordable. So low carbon, fossil free, and cheap. So this will be the paramount of like the new political cycle. So the consensus is, of course, that we need to electrify whatever we can. That will require a lot of investment, obviously, because now we have around 24% of electricity in the final energy demand, and the aspirations, the targets are to achieve 30%, over 30%, and most likely to reach 60-70% by the mid-century. And these are very ambitious goals for a couple of reasons. And one is because, well, in electricity generation, we will need to replace not only fossil fuel generation, but we need to double efforts on fossil-free, low-carbon electricity, because we will need much more electricity than today. This is a consensus. And of course, in terms of generation, well, there are many debates. So here in Brussels, we have a look at all kinds of discussions. Of course, each of low carbon generation capacity, generation source has its own tricks and issues, but of course the consensus, we will have a renewable dominated system, renewable dominated electricity system, but then of course for renewables all the questions will come, like the business case, the profitability under the current electricity market design, that's a big issue to discuss, and then total system costs, of course, like LCOE of renewables is going down, but then we need to look at the total system cost, and that's something like also at the EU level we need to discuss seriously. For nuclear as another low carbon dispatchable option, of course, well, it's the debate in Brussels is pretty polarized, it's pretty contested, and of course, like economics, especially with increasingly negative prices, electricity prices, it's also like another big question mark to discuss, and that's what will be also done in the next, in the new political cycle. And then, of course, like if we speak about dispatchable power, gas-fired generation is the elephant in the room, because that's like appears to reappear on the discussion, and of course that's something that we need also to have a pan-European discussion what will be the dispatch.
When you say pan-European, it makes me think that, we are 27 member states, and usually energy policy is seen as a national topic.
Absolutely.
And all the countries have their own priorities and their own view on everything from nuclear power to like grid connections. Just to mention one thing, that just randomly, that Sweden has been very interested in. So how do you view that? How do you solve that, the European interest versus sort of the member state interest?
Well, that's a very, very tricky question, because of course generation capacities is within the remit of member states, and then of course, like for this cycle, the biggest question is, okay, how we ensure dispatchable low carbon generation capacity, and if we check energy sources, and of course there are only a few, and some of them are very like in dividing lines between member states. And then of course one of the arguments will be, okay, we need cross-border interconnectors can solve. And then of course if you have a look at market integration in the past maybe 15 years, then it has solved a lot of issues, and also during the electricity energy price crisis in 2022-23, well, it helped a lot. And then of course certain markets can be integrated better, but then it's always like the question, okay, we always come back to the question, it's not only interconnection, but it's about sufficient generation capacity. And then of course, well, if coming back to the debates, of course, like in Nordic countries like Norway, Sweden, there have been recently many debates about electricity prices, because every time when you have a price fight due to a coupling,
it's always a German
it's always a very political,
yeah,
it's always a very sensitive issue, and then to some extent, of course, some solutions or at least some dialogue at EU level is inevitable.
Yeah, and Charlotte, I on this topic of not aligning always with the interest, the pan-European interest, you have a Business Europe as your sort of friends, business organization that you are part of, and they have been quite not so strongly for this view that green transition and competitiveness go hand in hand, or do you take a fight with them sometimes?
Well,
short answer.
I mean, big organizations like Business Europe or any other of sectorial organizations, or not only business organizations, we are a collection of not only 27 member states with, as we just heard, different views on different things and different interests depending. So taking that into account, of course there are different views, it's a give and take. I see over the years that, and not so many years actually, that maybe there was more of a slower pace in, if we look at the Nordic countries where we still are quite ahead of the curve, if we see in Europe in general, in all senses when it comes to the green transition, other parts of Europe are not there yet. And of course that is also reflected in a coalition like Business Europe. So of course it's not as maybe vocal as we can be from us and my Nordic colleagues. But I must say that over the years, I find that there is a much more of an alignment and more also of an understanding from other countries. And that makes Business Europe in general much more in line with our thinking, even if it's not as maybe fast, if I can put it like that. But as we said before, and you also mentioned it, I strongly believe that whatever the politicians say in the end of the story, there will be, the green transition will be driven by businesses. We will do it, but in different paces, and in different, depending on what the capacities in the countries. We also have to think about that, because we have a long tradition. Other countries, like in the eastern parts of Europe, they do not have that. We also have to give them a little bit of a leeway to come to that, but not saying that they, I mean, they are well, they lag behind in a sense, but that probably because they don't have the same preconditions as we. And I just want to mention one thing in this room of many working with research and science. In all technology shifts, the big ones, there are the front runners and the ones lagging behind and the ones that will not make it. And this is also here, and you can see that in a collaboration like Business Europe or whatever organization that we have around here in Brussels. So, to your question, we are getting there, maybe not as much in speed like the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, but in grosso modo we are all aligned.
Thank you. I will give one question now to Mikael, Allan, and then I will let all of you get a short question at the end. So you mentioned the risk of climate change. Like we hear a lot about sometimes the risk for the economy that the green transition would pose. But you are talking a lot about the risk of climate change, which is also a real economic risk, of course. But is that real economic risk really taken enough into account from the policymaker side, or are they just do they only want to protect like the existing industries?
I wouldn't necessarily say that that these are necessarily conflicting objectives. I worked for the UK government for about 10 years, largely on energy transition and international collaboration on mitigation, and of course, you know, the points that have been raised here, especially by Charlotte here, the green economic opportunities are compelling generally, and hence it's been a big factor in driving this discussion. After the financial crisis, the low carbon sector in the UK grew 4 times as fast as the rest of the economy. So there are, of course, important growth opportunities here, and businesses are going to be absolutely critical in unlocking our transition to net zero. But over the last 3 years, I've been working on physical climate risks, and that's a very sobering experience. And one of the things that the European Climate Risk Assessment highlighted was risks to supply chains, pharmaceutical, agriculture, critical minerals. Many of these already have thin margin for error. In terms of critical minerals, we're expecting demand to surpass supply by 2030.
It's great that you mentioned that, because that's the next panel.
Exactly. So, at the same, and yet that risk assessment underestimates the impacts for private sector, because as it was going into press, King's College came up with a study estimating a $26 trillion cost of supply chain disruptions. And this will largely be felt by businesses. And you're already seeing Standard & Poor's starting to downgrade, causing downgrades of corporate credit ratings on the basis of physical climate risks. So I think businesses are becoming very acutely aware to this. I think one of the problems is what happens to the small and medium-sized enterprises, because you have a lot of the early movers in this field, whether it's on mitigation or adaptation, sustainability or resilience. These are bigger corporates that have deep pockets, and they have the ability to be the first movers. They've been very strong proponents for ambitious climate policies because they want to level the playing field to create an enabling policy environment that incentivizes business-led adaptation. But the problem is that small and medium-sized enterprises, they have weaker access to finance, weaker balance sheets, and they're not being caught up in this. And the problem is that many of those organizations that are now adopting the reporting and disclosure and due diligence requirements of the CSRD and the CSDD, they benefit from the transparency of the supply chains that enables them to identify a host of different supply chain risks. Small and medium-sized companies that are not being subjected to that, they also lack that transparency, and they will be vulnerable as a result. So this is not about passing blame on anyone. These companies are struggling for good reasons, but this is where I think policy needs to step up to provide the support as well, not only making the demands. These
it's difficult for one like mid-sized company to solve it themselves. It's not like something that everyone is doing. Thanks a lot. So we need to move on, unfortunately, but there will be mingle and things, and if you want to invite any of these excellent speakers to your own event at some other time and talk more to them, they would be happy to come, of course. So the last question that I want you to just say very quickly, what's your favorite Green Deal thing that you do not want the Commission and the Parliament and the Council to step back on? What would that be if you choose just one thing? What's your favorite, Charlotte?
Actually, it's the ambition of the Green Deal that when it came, the direction that it gave. That's, at least from our point of view, the favorite part. Then it's how this
Only those that you like. Only those that you like.
The ambition is very right, and we hope that will not go away.
Thank you. Lars?
Yeah, that was a good answer. I could say the same thing actually, but it's very nice to see that the new Commission, in spite of what's going on in the world, that they sustain the environmental and the climate flavour of their work and actually puts it up there as one of the three most important things, along with industrial development and security.
Thank you. Irina?
Well, I would say probably something that I would like to stay and to be doubled down. So pragmatic reality check for energy transition without normative strings and technology neutrality for low carbon, carbon-free technologies.
And Mikael?
It's difficult to select. It's like which one of your children is your favorite. There are so many things that are equally important, but I would like to say that in spite of challenges and improvements that need to be made to the CEPS, I think that's an extremely important policy. We often talk about it as a dry kind of tariff, it's a trade policy lever, but in many ways this is really like a global industrial strategy incentive. It is really, if it becomes successful, implemented, this will, I think in years later we'll be looking at it as a moonshot effort.
Thanks a lot, panel. You did great.